the Shakti Collective, and I'm Nandita, and we have with us today Charles. And Charles, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Charles Hall. I am a senior accessibility designer at CVS Health, formerly a senior UX designer at MRM in Detroit, and I've been in the space of design for over 3 decades, and specifically focusing on accessibility since roughly 2008.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We are very excited to have you here today. And to kick off, I'd just like to know so how would you describe accessibility in just 3 words?
The absence of barriers.
I love that. I love that. And in thinking about the field for a while, why do you care about accessibility? What made you gravitate towards the field?
A number of things. And I think probably just in defense of people, that it's a basic civil right and a basic human need, but also because it's personal. I'm older than I look, obviously, having been in the industry for over 3 decades. I'm starting to lose my own vision, and I have some atypical cognitive quirks.
Awesome. Yeah, I can relate to that, and I understand, because I mean, I found my disability later in life myself. So I found out about my disability in my 20s. So it's been life-changing, but I can definitely see that. And so if you had to share and think about what was your first aha moment with accessibility, is there something that comes to mind?
Yeah, and I like to say I've been atoning for it ever since. So again, I've been doing design and development related things for quite a while. And in 2007, I was working at a promotion agency that created a product that was built entirely in Flash. And I shortly after discovered that you cannot navigate a Flash media file via a keyboard, and it doesn't expose any actual actionable elements to the browser. It's basically a movie. So that's how I learned about accessibility sort of the hard way through having released that product. And I've been atoning for that, 2 decades of mistakes over the last decade and a half, roughly.
Oh no. How did that go? What happened after you shipped it?
Well, fortunately for end users, it was kind of a marketing fail. It wasn't well funded and supported, so the product eventually died. So it's not still out there in the hands of consumers who may be facing barriers with it. The basic concept evolved, and the organization learned, and I learned.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And can you tell us a little bit more about if there's someone that comes to mind, someone who's had an influence on your accessibility professional career? What lessons did this person teach you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are so many, even to name one feels a little bit disingenuous because it's really the entire community. They are all influenced me in very different ways, some through lived experience, some through knowledge sharing, some through just being able to vent about the same things. But there are quotes that resonate really strongly, and some that I remember more than others. And the one that comes to mind is when answering a question about the number of people affected, Derek Featherstone replied, "More than 0." And I just love that answer because it negates the whole quantity argument. It's not about a number of people, it's about people.
I love that. I am stealing that one for sure. I love that. And on the same lines, like you said, it's about the people, right? It's about making that difference. What keeps you inspired to continue in accessibility?
I guess impact. Again, the community is wonderful. I love hearing stories and sharing stories, and those are all inspiring. But more than anything else, impact, like seeing actual change, is probably the most inspiring.
Actual change, absolutely, absolutely. And switching gears a little bit, trying to just learn a little bit more about your work. Can you tell us a little bit more about, you mentioned impact, right? And a little bit more about your work in digital accessibility, whether it's in your current role as the senior UX designer at CVS, or if there's any other experiences you'd like to share.
Yeah, so impact on end users was the response to inspiration, but really my role presently and historically has also had an impact internally. So my job is specifically to help others level up. So I act as a coach to help design teams better understand accessibility and the functional needs of people. So the impact is twofold. I've helped someone in their career and their design expertise, but then I've also helped the end user of that design.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And so you mentioned that, within their team, it's also creating that awareness, right? And then helping others level up. Can you share some ways in which you've helped build support for accessibility in your organization?
Yeah. So in the current role and in my previous role, one of the ways is opportunities to learn, things like lunch and learns and internal channels of communication where things get shared, and jumping into as many conversations as relevant and possible. But also I have affected change on the policy side within organizations, helping draft a social media accessibility policy for my previous agency, for example, launching a accessibility champions program, things like that put the focus internally.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so as you've shared your knowledge and as you've yourself learned, what experiences have been beneficial to you, even as a designer, for gaining experience in accessibility?
Well, I'm constantly learning, so that in itself is an experience that benefits me and my organization. But again, the community is probably the resounding answer to most of these questions. It is. I'm often asked about tools, like what is a good design tool, what's a good evaluation tool, things like that. And my response in the last couple of years has been people, right? It's each other. Without learning from each other, without learning the functional needs of people, we're only getting part of the story.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I've just through our conversations, I feel like I've learned so much too. So I totally relate. Like that's very beautifully said. And during the course of your journey as well, how have you requested support for professional development of your accessibility knowledge? I know you've mentioned people that you've learned a lot through people. Are there other avenues?
Yeah. So I was in a scenario for a very long time where the budget for professional development and conferences and things like that was extremely limited and across a large organization. And in order to have equity there, basically, if you got to attend a conference once, you're probably off the list because other people have to, be able to tap into that budget as well. So The requesting support from the organization was relatively small because of that professional development budget constraint. But I've been fortunate enough to self-fund my learning. In fact, you can see behind me a bookshelf that's rather extensive. These are not like, works of fiction. Those are all design and accessibility related titles behind me. So I've invested in books. I've invested in going to conferences on my own. I'm an invited expert in the W3C, not through membership of my employer. So in order to attend events there, I also self-fund.
That makes sense. That makes sense. On that note, do you have any couple books you'd like to share with us that you feel have been excellent resources for someone trying to learn?
Oh, I wasn't expecting that question, and just like the people, there are so many. I think one of the best accessibility related books that I've come across, at least in the last decade, has got to be Mismatch from Kat Holmes. I can't say enough about that. It helps really bring to light systemic exclusion and presents a few different ways to frame the opportunity of inclusion. But then there is also hidden gems like This Human from Melis Sinova. And that book speaks to being introspective as a designer and asking the question, who is designing? Not who are we designing for, but actually who's making the decisions. And that's a really powerful book about access and exclusion without overtly saying that it is.
Right. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing those. And during your career, or even from all the books, all the people you've talked to, met, been around, what was something that you learned that surprised you? Anything in this field?
Oh yeah, I'm surprised by the resilience of people. But specifically, the thing that was probably the most surprising is listening to native screen reader users and the speed at which they have the read rate set. So if you're a occasional or novice screen reader user, you're probably listening to it at the voice that I'm speaking, or at the speed that I'm speaking right now, just to make sure that you're comprehending everything that's on the page. But if you're an expert user or a native screen reader user and you've been using it for, the majority of your tech years, you're probably listening to it very, very fast, and that surprises a lot of people. It surprised me.
Awesome. So that's awesome. And between, again, switching gears a little bit, I know different people might look at this differently, so I was just curious to hear your thoughts on, for you, what is the difference between inclusive design and accessibility?
Yeah, so that is where that Kat Holmes book Mismatch comes in to help solidify this. So I've believed this all along and sort of struggled with interpreting the inclusive design principles that are out there and the way that other people in our field talk about inclusive design, even in major events like Inclusive Design 24. The majority of people seem to continue to describe inclusive design as a set of methods and principles to design for more people. And that to me is just design. Designing for people is table stakes. That's just design. The point of inclusive design is designing with people. It's making sure that they have a seat at the table. It's hiring people with disabilities, empowering people with disabilities taking people who are normally excluded or marginalized and making sure they have a seat at the table as part of the decision-making process.
Making sure they have a seat at the table. Absolutely. And from all the amazing work you've done, from being an invited expert at all these different places and being part of W3C as well, what are some of your proudest accomplishments in accessibility?
Yeah, so again, I've had some measurable impact, and I feel that's that in itself is a great accomplishment. But it's hard to frame and qualify and publicize. Again, I've been in the industry for a very long time. I haven't used a portfolio in like 2.5 decades for a number of different reasons. But so the thing that I have accomplished is having multiple titles in the space that help tell that story that a lack of portfolio isn't telling. So obviously I'm employed. I have a title through my employer. Invited expert in the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group. I'm also the chair of the Inclusive Design for the Immersive Web Community Group. I'm a member of my local city's Accessibility and Inclusion Advisory Commission. And those titles are, better reflective of an elevator pitch of the fact that I have accomplished something.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, given all of your years of experiences, I'm sure you've had to change someone's mind or perspective regarding accessibility. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of aha moments that you can help facilitate for other people when teaching them about accessibility. But there's some that resonate more and have a more profound reaction. And the one that I often refer to is I was teaching accessibility to the creative team at my previous agency and talking about audio description. And to illustrate the point, I played the first 7 minutes of The Lion King, the version with audio description, and then had them, I illustrated the point that there was no dialogue in the first 7 minutes of The Lion King. So if you were blind and you did not have audio description, you would have no idea what was going on, but you would also have no idea what the rest of the movie was about. So
wow, yes, you're right.
Profound realization that something that would be considered a nice to have accessibility feature is actually not nice to have, it's critical.
Need to have. You've totally changed the way I'm always going to look at Lion King now. For sure.
Yeah, I would highly encourage you to watch the audio described version. It's wonderful.
I'm definitely going to do that. We have it on, I know we have it on DVD, so we've seen it a couple times at home with family, but I'm going to find that version. So for sure, thank you for sharing that. And so if there's one element of digital design that, for everyone, like if you could change that one element, what would it be?
Well, I would think specifically element. So then I would say underline links, period. Like no exception. All links should have an underline.
All links should have an underline. Okay. And in terms of, again, accessibility can be so different for so many different formats. There's web versus mobile versus other formats like XR. How is it different for these well-established formats versus, these more experimental formats like XR?
Right. So fortunately, even well-established formats evolve, right? There's always, new CSS features. Every once in a while, there's new HTML elements. Those established platforms actually do change and evolve. But newer emerging platforms and things that extend the web or incorporate some web service in a larger thing like an Internet of Things or a natural interface, those all tend to force us to think about spatial relationships and where a person is in their physical environment in addition to the screen that they might be consuming content from. And that affords us the opportunity to really think about human-centered design, where we prioritize every decision about their safety in that environment. So everything that happens on a screen is secondary to making sure that they're safe in that physical space interacting with that thing.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And how has the concept of accessibility work changed over time, as you've seen through your career?
That is a good question. The concept of accessibility is usually that there's a compliance aspect, like I have to do X in order to meet Y, and that's unfortunate, but it's pervasive in the United States, which is a litigious society. But the lens has predominantly been a legal one. I must do this thing, and I think it's finally starting to evolve, thanks to the advocacy of a very large community, to understand that it's really about opportunity and being able to serve those human needs versus just legal requirements.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And how do you change people's minds and hearts about accessibility?
I think the probably the most direct and successful way that I've ever seen is to make it personal. So Adrian Roselli actually wrote a really good piece about designing for yourself, and that's a great reference to this point. But it's really statistically impossible that someone is not connected to a person with a disability or has some form of disability themselves. The numbers are much larger than we always hear or often talk about. So someone that has a functional need, that struggles with technology for one reason or another. But it's also likely going to be yourself in a few years down the road, right? Like, again, I opened up introducing myself as someone who is, my eyesight is failing rather quickly at this stage in life. It happens to everyone. No one is immune from, situational and contextual needs. And most people are not immune from, like, physical and sensory and cognitive needs.
Absolutely. And on the same lines, we've talked about, you said make it personal. How can we make it more about people and less about standards and compliance?
I think I would love to know the answer to that myself. I ask that of myself and of the community fairly often, and I've come to the conclusion over the last few years that it's to change the guidelines themselves, to change the standards that we draw this information from, which is why I got involved in Silver, which is now becoming WCAG 3. It's the working group's effort to reimagine the standard.
When is that going to come out? if you're allowed to tell
Yeah,
us.
so that's
Just
a great
curious.
question. We're looking at WCAG 2.2 coming out mid next year, and that process is more of a formal process of the recommendation track. The majority of the work to get it out the door will probably close very early next year, which will then free up the rest of the working group to shift gears and focus on WCAG 3. So we'll have the task force, the community group, and the larger parent working group all working on the same effort. It's still hard to say, though, when that will materialize. We have an editor's draft out now. There'll be a first public working draft out very soon for public comment. And then we'll take that comment and work on it as fast as we can with the entire community. But I imagine it's probably, it's probably fair to say it's a couple years out. Will land, first and give us more.
Yeah, looking forward to that, and looking forward to 2.2 coming out as well. Absolutely. And so, with you again, with different people you've worked with in the community, even especially y'all are working on this next thing coming out. What does an expert in accessibility mean to you?
I'm sorry, what in accessibility?
What does an expert in accessibility mean to you?
Yeah, so I think of expert in the Malcolm Gladwell sense of 10,000 hours of practice. So if someone accumulated that kind of time working in the space of accessibility, then by that standard, that ability and proficiency and literacy qualifies under his explanation. But it's really impossible to be an expert because humans are messy and complicated and nuanced and ever-changing. In fact, functional needs don't just vary across people. Functional needs vary within an individual over time and context. So it's really complicated subject matter to be, to call yourself an expert in.
Okay. Yeah. And what advice would you give to others who are thinking about or becoming involved within digital accessibility?
So I would say community, learn from people, but focus less on individual success criteria and atomic properties of individual things meeting those criteria. Focus more on shifting left as far possible within your organization, right? So evaluating something and remediating something that's already built is time intensive and labor intensive and can often be expensive as well because of that. So prevention is a lot easier, a lot less expensive, a lot less intensive during the design process. But really the place to start is before design is engaged at all, at the point where something is conceived as a possible problem to solve. That's the point where you start considering accessibility, and the farther left you can shift in your organization, the bigger impact you'll have on the organization as well as the end product.
Yeah, you're right. So trying to make sure you can focus on the concept of shifting left. Absolutely. And so in a parting question, what is that one thing that you could tell another designer that they can go do today, right, to achieve at least short-term accessibility in their day-to-day work, or something that they can keep in mind moving forward? So it could be something as simple as, hey, don't forget to add all text on your social media, for example. But it could be something as simplistic as that. What is that one thing that they can go to today?
I think that The one thing that's probably most important in that UX and design realm is communication, making sure that the things that you have identified as solving a human problem actually get articulated so that all of your stakeholders and inheritors of that understand why the problem is being solved, the way that it's being solved, and all of the properties that that thing needs to have in order to do that. So it's communication and documentation.
Communication and documentation. Okay, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much.